Happy New Year, everyone. Welcome to 2022. Thanks for tuning in to Eonan's Edge today. My first video for 2022 is going to be a basic guide, how to choose the right knife steel. You'll hear myself and other knife reviewers talk about knives with a certain type of blade steel. So what does that all mean to the average person? I thought it would be a good idea to give my viewers a basic overview of some popular steels used in knives. You may choose a knife based on size or looks or how it feels in your hand, but the blade steel will ultimately decide how your knife performs when you put it into use. The majority of the information I'm giving you came from Knife Informer website, knifeinformer.com. The original article is by Matt Davidson. I'll put a link in the descriptions below for those of you who'd like to read his more full detailed version, and I'd highly recommend that if you want more information. I've condensed it for time and to show some actual knives with some of the steels mentioned. I'd like to also note I'm not a knifesmith. I'm not covering all steels in each category. I'm just giving an overview of a few of the more popular ones from each. So today's modern steels are basically alloys. They're a mix of carbon and iron with other elements blended in to help improve the steel's performance in key areas. Generally, there are 5 of these key areas or properties you'll hear discussed when we're talking about blade steels. So the first one is going to be hardness, toughness, wear resistance, corrosion resistance, and edge retention. So let's talk about hardness first. Hardness is the ability of your blade to resist deforming when subject to stress. Hardness in knife steels is generally measured using the Rockwell scale. You'll sometimes see it listed as HRC and a number like 58 or 60 or 61, or you might see it referred to just as Rockwell hardness and then a number after it. The higher the number, the harder the steel. Toughness. Toughness is the ability to resist damage like cracks, chips, or breakage during hard use. Generally, the harder the steel is, the less tough it's likely to be. So you can already see that there's always going to be some trade-offs in these categories. Wear resistance. Wear resistance is the steel's ability to withstand damage from both abrasion and adhesion. So abrasion, very simply, is when a harder surface passes over a softer surface. And adhesion is when debris is dislodged from one surface and attaches to another, usually the softer surface. And the easiest way to describe this in something that everybody can understand is if you've ever fallen down and put your hand out and scraped it on a sidewalk or a driveway, and you get a scrape on the palm of your hand, that's an abrasion. And when a little bit of that concrete or gravel or driveway material is left in the palm of your hand, that's adhesion. So that same kind of thing can happen to the steel of your knife. It's going to take usually a pretty hard, much harder type of surface for the knife to come in contact, but it does happen. Sometimes you'll see things get transferred over to your knife, or your knife might get scratched by coming in contact with something that's harder. So again, that's wear resistance. Wear resistance generally correlates to how hard the steel is, but it's also influenced by the actual metallurgy, what the steel is actually made up of. And again, too high of wear resistance can decrease toughness. So again, a trade-off. Corrosion resistance is number 4. It's the ability simply of the blade to resist corrosion, such as rust caused by humidity, moisture, or salt air. It's important to note that no blade steels are 100% corrosion proof. Additionally, creating a high resistance to corrosion usually means sacrificing some overall edge retention. That brings us to number 5, edge retention. So edge retention represents how long the blade will retain its sharpness when subject to use. Remember that last part, when subject to use. Why do I say that over again? Because static sharpness means virtually nothing. It doesn't matter how sharp a knife is at a counter or in a case. The sharpest knife doesn't necessarily mean the best knife. I've seen plenty of inexpensive knives that have been razor sharp right out of the box, but won't hold an edge, hence they lack edge retention. And by the same token, I've seen really high-end knives that have come in only moderately sharp, but they'll hold that edge for a long time, and they can be obviously sharpened and made sharper if you desire. So edge retention, again, how long it can hold that edge when it's subject to use. Static sharpness means nothing. Never buy a knife because it's sharper than another knife. So even though edge retention is what everyone talks about when discussing knives and knife blades, it's unfortunately that thing lacks any type of defined standards. There's no real defined standards for what edge retention really is. So the amount of edge retention you need in a knife will almost certainly be a personal choice. This will be dictated very simply by how often you use the knife and how often you want to sharpen it based on those usage and purposes. So as you can see from what I've covered already, it's not easy to just maximize each of these 5 properties. There's always going to be some trade-offs and some balancing to get the steel to perform up to a certain level. So you're going to have to decide what performance you need from the knife. And this is also why people like myself own lots of different knives for different tasks. So now that you know these 5 key areas, corrosion, toughness, hardness, wear resistance, and edge retention, let's go ahead and talk about some examples of today's popular steels. So the first one is going to be carbon steel. And carbon steel is generally made for rough use where toughness and durability is important. It's common in survival knives and machetes. Carbon steel will take a sharp edge. It's easy to sharpen. The trade-off is it's usually more prone to corrosion because it doesn't have as high levels of chromium. The most common carbon steel knife is usually 1095 these days, although there are lots of others. Tool steel. Tool steel is primarily hard steel alloys used for cutting tools. It's become very popular in knives for a long time. A couple of common knife tool steels are D2, M4, and 3V. And I have at least one knife on the table right now that has one of those steels in it. And then finally, stainless steel. Stainless steel is basically carbon steel, the first category, with lots of chromium added to it to resist corrosion and other elements. Get added in there as well. So this is by far the most popular category today for everyday carry, knife steel. Some examples of this, common ones are 400 series stainless. Everybody has heard of 440C. 154 CM, 8CR13 MOV, OS 8, Sandvik, Crucibles, SV series of steels. These are all stainless. Most of the blades I have on the table are some form of stainless. It's also worth noting that to qualify as a true stainless steel, there has to be at least 13% chromium in the blade mixture. And also, the term stainless steel is kind of misleading. Virtually all types of steel will show some kind of discoloration if they're left exposed to elements for long enough. So again, like I said earlier, no steel is 100% corrosion proof. All right, so there's our 3 types of steels. We've got carbon steel, tool steel, and stainless steel. So now let's get into the good stuff. Let's talk about knives from the low end of the scale to the top end of the scale, and that's really why I put these knives out on the counter, so I could show you some examples of each one. I don't have every knife made of every steel that I'm going to mention here, and again, I'm just going to kind of give a general overview. So low-end steels, the 2 most common are generally generic 420 and 420J. Some other low-end steels are OS 6, which is a Japanese steel. As you'd expect, knives made from this type of steel are generally very low priced, mass produced. They'll likely be the $10 or $12 Walmart knife or the $9.99 truck stop knife, for example. I recommend not buying in this category. There are much better steels for a fraction more money. There are plenty of good $15 to $30 knives out there, like the Harn's Knight that I reviewed recently. If you haven't seen that, please go check that one out. That's a $13 knife that performs like a $35 knife, pretty much. So again, no reason to buy in this category. The knives are going to wear fast. The quality, the workmanship is usually not that good. So we're going to jump into lower mid-range. So lower mid-range is going to be things like 420 high carbon, 1095, 13C26, which is a little lower end Sandvik. And here's a knife right here that I've shown before. This is the US made Kershaw Link. I have this in a couple different variations. This is one of my favorites, and you can see by the clip where it's been used a lot. So this one here is 420 high carbon steel. That's in the low range category, but a really solid knife. So 420 HC is considered, or was considered for a while, sort of the king of the 420 steels. It has a lot of carbon in it. It's still a lower to mid-range steel, and a lot of manufacturers, bigger manufacturers like Kershaw and other brands, can heat treat it well and get a lot out of it. You'll typically find this steel on blades under 50 bucks. Some other steels in this range, like I said, 440A, 1095, and Sandvik 13C26. So that's low mid. So now we're going to move to upper mid. 440C, OS 8, 8CR13 MOV, and Sandvik 14C28N. So 440C, I don't have a knife on the table right at the moment with 440C, but it used to be the considered the high-end US knife steel. It's still a good all-around steel. It's been overshadowed, obviously, because there's so many other steels out there, more modern steels that are blended better. It's reasonably tough, wear-resistant, and can be sharpened fairly easy. OS 8, I have a knife here with the OS 8. This is a CRKT Shenanigan. It was part of one of my other reviews. So again, there's an OS 8 knife. I've got a couple of those, a couple different ones. It's a Japanese steel with good corrosion resistance. It's tough, has decent edge retention. It's very easy to sharpen, and it will take a pretty fine edge. The 8CR13 MOV knife, I've shown you a lot of these. This is the Kershaw Natrix. Just did a review on this knife recently too. Fairly inexpensively priced. It's a pretty good steel. So typically you get great value of these. I'm going to talk about the 8CR or the Chinese CR line. So the CR and MOV series steels originate from China. They're comparable to Japanese OS 8, but they have higher carbon. You get good value for these. A lot of manufacturers are using this steel these days. Spyderco is using it on their knives. Kershaw is using it. Civivi's using it. A lot of these big companies have mastered heat treatment processes. It really makes a good steel. There's other very popular variants of this. There's 814, there's 918, which has higher carbon and chromium, and a pretty new variant that they came out with is 10CR 15CO MOV. I know this long description, but it's basically similar in performance to VG10, which is a very popular steel. So again, the 8CR steel that comes in a knife like this Kershaw and some of the other knives I have kicking around, like say this Spyderco right here. This is also an 8CRV. This is one of their entry-level knives with that steel on it. So a lot of these knives use this steel. It's super popular today. That's why I'm spending a little extra time talking about it. So 14C28N. It's a stainless steel from Swedish manufacturer Sandvik. One of my favorite knives of all time here, the Knockout by Kershaw. So this knife here uses Sandvik steel, as well as this little Kershaw leak. So you can get the steel on a lot of different size knives. This leak also uses Sandvik steel. Obviously, two totally different styles of knives. They're going to get used a little differently, but they both have the same blade steel. So you can get blade steel in a lot of different knife configurations. This is a modern steel, and overall, it's very impressive for a mid-range steel. It can be made extremely sharp. I can attest to that. That Knockout is still very, very sharp, and I've only actually had to sharpen that knife once in all the years I've carried it. It's a very sharp knife. It's a good steel. Actually, in my opinion, and it's not only my opinion, but again, it is just that, this could be the best knife steel you'll find on a budget production knife. So Sandvik 14C28N, honestly, for me, it's one of my favorites. If you're looking at a budget knife and it says it has Sandvik 14C on it, you're going to get a really, really solid blade for the money. It continues to be quite popular with knife manufacturers for this very reason. So now we're going to move into high end. So high end is going to include 154 CM, CPM 154. I'll explain the difference between those in a minute. D2, VG10, and N690. Now I only have the two 154s and the N690 on the table today. I don't have a D2 knife in my collection at the moment. I sold one and traded one a few years back, so that's not there, but I do plan on buying a couple of other D2 knives. So let's talk about 154 CM first. That's here on this Benchmade Barrage. There you go, 154 CM, boom. Okay, so obviously it's a full-size knife. And it has decent toughness and holds an edge well. It's not too difficult to sharpen. You'll find a lot of pocket knives, a lot of quality pocket knives from top manufacturers like Benchmade using 154 CM steel. You're also going to see CPM 154. We can get that in there for you. There we go. CPM 154 right there on the blade. And that is a powdered version of the same steel. It uses the same ingredients. It's produced using Cruciable's particle metallurgy. So this process makes finer carbide particles, resulting in slight superiority of the steel. It's a little tougher with a little better edge retention. Basically what it does is if the gaps between my fingers were 154 CM, like this, the CPM 154, because it's finer grains and it's a powdered metallurgy, it basically makes those gaps between the metal at a very tiny level smaller. So it makes a stronger steel. And that's really the only difference. This is becoming more popular now, the CPM 154, simply because it's a slightly better steel. If you're going to make it, you might as well make the better one, I would say. But again, there's nothing wrong with 154 CM, same basic ingredients in it, just the process that it's made by is a little more refined. D2 is super popular on a lot of knives. Like I said, I have my eye on a couple of D2 knives right now. It's a tool steel, that second category that we referred to. It's also referred to as semi-stainless. It doesn't quite have enough chromium in it to qualify as a full stainless, yet it has a good amount of corrosion resistance. D2 steel is very hard and holds a good edge. That said, it is kind of tough to sharpen. You have to really put some time into it. There are loads of production knives currently made from D2. And I also need to mention CPM D2 is Cruciable's powdered metal version, basically, of D2. So it's a little finer grade. It's probably the best of the D2 offering steels out there at the moment. If you see CPM in front of that D2, that just means it's just the manufacturing process is just a little better, a little bit more modern. And then finally, we're going to talk about N690. So this little Kaiser Lieb that I have here, which I love, is made from N690. So 680, 690, you'll hear them both talked about a lot. This is a great little steel. This Bowler steel contains nitrogen and over 17% chromium. So again, 13% is typically what they require for a stainless steel. This one has 17% in it, making it extremely corrosion resistant. If you're worried about corrosion resistance, then N690 could be a very good steel choice for you. It's also fine grain steel, and I can tell you that it does take a very sharp, fine edge. This knife is still razor sharp after being in and out of my pocket a lot and being used quite a bit over this past year. I've not had to sharpen it. It definitely is razor sharp. You can shave with this knife, no question. So that's N690. It comes in a lot of different blade sizes and shapes and different kinds of knives, but this is one of my little gentleman's pocket carry knives in N690. I love this thing. Okay, so let's move on. One other steel I do want to mention is VG10. That's another steel that fits into this kind of high-end category, but we're going to move on to premiums. So let's talk premium knives next. So Premiums, we've got M4, 3V. There's a 3V knife here. S30Vs, there's 3 of those. You can see there's 3 different knives there with S30V on them. S35VN also. So we'll talk about 3V real quick. I've done a review recently on this Kaiser Critical Mini. This uses 3V steel. M4 and 3V are kind of compared to each other a lot. But this knife right here is Christensen Knives design by Kaiser. Again, uses CPM 3V steel. So 3V is a high toughness, wear resistant tool steel. Again, second category in the 3 that we talked about. It's made by Cruciable's CPM particle metallurgy process, and it's designed to provide maximum wear resistance to breakage and chipping in this high resistance steel. It does offer good impact resistance, greater than that of D2 or M4, and it also has excellent edge retention. So what's the downside? Well, it only has like 7% chromium in it. So this knife is, while it has good edge retention and it's tough and good wear resistance, it's probably going to discolor a little bit over the course of time unless you take really good care of it and keep it well oiled. Typically, I don't think that's going to be a problem for most people. But again, if you're going to use the knife where there's a lot of moisture and humidity, or maybe you're going to take it out on a boat or something like that with you, maybe you want to choose a different steel. Maybe you want N690 or something like that, or something that has more corrosion resistance instead of something like M4 or 3V like this steel. But it is a good steel, really tough, holds an edge really well. So next we're going to talk about S30V. This is made by Cruciable, US-based Cruciable. CPM S30V, often referred to as just S30V. It has excellent edge retention and resists rust effortlessly. It was designed in the US. It's typically designed for high-end premium pocket knives and expensive kitchen cutlery. You'll see it on some kitchen knives sometimes. The introduction of vanadium carbides in this steel brings the hardness into the steel alloy, and dollar for dollar, this is generally regarded as one of the finer knife blade steels with optimal balance of edge retention, hardness, and toughness. So again, you're going to see somewhere on the blade, they're going to list the steel, and there it is, S30V. So just to show you, you can get that same steel. That's a Benchmade Griptilian, and their mini Griptilian also, right here, comes in S30V as well. And the mini Boost that I have here comes in S30V. So S30V is on a ton of knives these days. I mean, you can get it in almost every blade style, shape, configuration there is. And then finally, for this category, we'll talk about S35VN. So I have 2 knives here. I have the Civivi Pintail. You can't quite see it, but there is laser etching right down here on the very bottom of the blade that says S35VN. So I have that knife in S35VN. And then I also have the ZT0770CF, which comes with S35VN steel. So again, 2 totally different sizes of knives, 2 different blade shapes, but they both contain this steel. All this really is, it's a slightly superior version of the S30 knives that you see up here in the premium category. They use a finer grain structure, add some small quantities of niobium. That's where you get the N and the VN from, niobium. It basically makes the knife a little easier to machine, makes it a little tougher, gives you the ability to sharpen it a little easier. The niobium makes it a little more workable. Honestly, this is kind of a sweet spot for a lot of people. You'd struggle to find any steel with better edge retention, toughness, and stain resistance for the money. Also worth noting, there is an S45VN version out now, which has an extra dose of chromium in it for a little bit more corrosion resistance. If it was on a knife you liked, the S45, go ahead and buy it. But I wouldn't spend the extra money for a S45 over an S35. Again, unless maybe you worked in an environment where you were on a boat, or you were at the lake a lot and you were kind of worried about that little extra corrosion resistance. Otherwise, there's really not going to be any difference in performance there. So that's S35. That's the top, sort of the top of the premium knives I'm going to talk about for today. And then we get into ultra premium. Now, I don't have all of these blade steels, but we're going to talk a little bit about a couple of them. So we have Cruciable's S110V and S90V. I'll talk about those together. The S110 is probably the ultimate in wear resistance and edge retention in mainstream knife making. It's ridiculously expensive though. So the 110, like I said, very expensive. The S190 is just one step below that, just like a mini step below that. It's close to the S110V in wear resistance and edge retention, very, very close. It has a lot more vanadium in it than what you have in S30 and S35 or LMAX, and it's ridiculously expensive as well. So the 110 and the 90, you really have to want to spend that extra money. And we're talking, just to give you an idea, an S90V Kershaw 940 Osbourne is probably around $275, $285. And a 110V, you're talking a knife that's easily in the mid threes, maybe even close to $4, depending on what manufacturer it is. So it's very, very expensive steel. So I do have some 20CV knives here on the table. I have two of them. 20CV is Cruciable's super steel. It's often compared to M390. It also influenced Carpenter steels to copycat it with CTS 204P. As a powdered metal tool steel, you get a combination of impressive wear resistance and edge retention. Here's two knives that I did in a review recently. They both have 20 CV steel in them. As an added benefit, they're both highly resistant to corrosion. They both have a lot of chromium in them. So Benchmade, which makes these other knives on the table, they claim that the M390 steel, which I'm going to talk about next, is marginally tougher, but that the 20 CV steel, which is what comes on this ZT0357 and this Kershaw link, has better edge retention. So they're both very similar steels. Their composition is pretty similar. 20 CV, a little edge to the edge retention is better, and the M390 is marginally tougher. But honestly, we're talking very minimal differences in these steels. So M390 is Bowler's super steel version of Cruciable's 20 CV. So Bowler basically said, hey, we're going to make a steel just like the steel that's on these knives, but we're going to market it ourselves. It has all the same properties, and I feel like the argument between M390 and 20 CV over which is the better knife blade super steel will likely continue along for a little while still, because they are both extremely popular as super steel knife blades. They both offer phenomenal performance and value. I personally think the 20 CV is a little easier to find on knives out there, but again, you can't go wrong with either one. I'm going to also throw an honorable mention out to LMAX. It's made by Oud Home, but Oud Home was bought by Bowler, who makes M390. It has excellent edge retention, very good corrosion resistance, and sharpens easily. It's less popular these days than M390 and 20 CV, though, probably because once Bowler bought out Oud Home, it doesn't really make sense to always keep making two steels that are kind of similar. So LMAX is another good one. You'll probably see that around. All right, so we're pretty much wrapping up here. So again, we've got choices here: low mid, upper mid, high end, premium, ultra premiums. Got some good examples of all those knives on the table. Hopefully you've learned a good amount about steel. Some of this is a little complicated, but I hope I broke it down and made it a little more simplified for you. But really, what does this all mean for you as a knife buyer if you're not really knowledgeable about steels? So in my humble opinion, and it's only that, your budget and your intended task for a knife should be the two biggest factors that you always consider in a knife purchase. Whether it's a compact, a full size, there are lots of good knife steels out there for almost any budget. You can see we've got knives here that are, $30 to $40, all the way up to knives that cost, a couple $100. Maybe you only use a knife to open your mail, cut open some cardboard boxes, maybe cut open the occasional plastic heat form packaging. Do you need a knife that has expensive 20 CV, steel and carbon fiber scales? Do you need one of these kind of knives? No, you don't. But if you use a knife at work every day to cut tie wraps, pallet strapping, and other oddities, or perhaps you hit the occasional, hidden metal box reinforcement while breaking down a mountain of cardboard, you don't want to have to go home every night or every couple days and resharpen your knife. Then maybe thinking about investing into a premium knife steel, something in this range over here, maybe that's worth doing. Let's also point out, though, that budget knives, budget price knives, and knives with lower tier steels, like we have in here, they may need to be sharpened a little bit more often. But if it fits into your budget and it accomplishes the tasks that you're using it for, then that's something you may be perfectly okay with. You may be like, yeah, I don't mind if I have to sharpen this knife, once a week or every few days if I'm putting it in heavy use, even though the steel is not quite as good, but the knife is made in a quality manner and it does everything I need it to do. Hey, that fits your budget. That's good. So I hope that you found this all educational. Whoa. Almost lost my camera there. Don't forget to click the like button down here at the bottom and the subscribe button over here in the corner. And if you like the video, feel free to leave a comment too. I always like to know what you guys think or if you have any questions. Thanks as always for watching and stay sharp, folks.